All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's time for our conversation, and my guests are with me right now. Taiwo Oyedele, to my immediate right, is the West Africa tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Oyedele, good to have you, and welcome to Abuja.
Thank you for having me.
How's Lagos?
Lagos is great.
It's great, yeah. All right, close to him and to my far right is Dr. Bosun Ayeni. He is a director of Digital Africa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy.
So welcome to you both. Just before, during the break, we were talking about, okay, I was speaking to Mr. Oyedele, not you now, because they are the tax people, though he doesn't work with FIRS anyway. I was asking, it's a season of taxes. Before we know it now, if we sleep and wake up tax, sleep tax, just like you said, drinking water tax, what actually is happening? Last week, also, we heard from Senator Ali Ndume, the proposed communication service tax that if passed, Nigerians may just begin to pay for making calls, cable TV, perhaps modern technology and all of that. Mr. Oyedele, just give me a background of all this. Because it seems you tax people are not asleep this time around.
Yes, yeah. The tax people are not asleep. Nigeria is broke. That is where to start. If you look at
Nigeria is broke.
Yeah, Nigeria is broke, yes.
Government may just say something else. That we're having revenue challenge.
So it depends on how you put it, but if it's black, just say it's black. So if you look at 2019, the budget and the performance for the first half, the expected collection from non-oil revenue was down by almost 30%. Even though collection from oil revenue went up by about 5%, but not enough to offset the decline in oil revenue. Then in terms of government expenditure, government has spent over 30% more than they budgeted for recurrent, and they have not spent a dime on capital development infrastructure. So if you put all of that together, what it means is the deficit has gone up, including the cost of servicing our debt has also gone up. Even from the MTEF, the projection for the next 3 years shows that the debt is going to be rising because deficit is going to be still around 2 trillion for each of those 3 years. Now, if you put all of that together, it tells you that government needs to do something differently to be able to, because this is just not sustainable. Whether what they're trying to do is now right, whether the approach is okay, it's a different conversation. But it is indeed to be expected that government in this kind of very dire situation will want to do a few things to try and change the narrative around the fiscal space. Okay,
let me bring in Dr. Ayeni. What do you think? Because this is communications, perhaps your space. Just give me your views, then we'll take it from there.
Well, first and foremost, the issue at hand is definitely around taxation, revenues, and then government making money. And it's always easy to look at low-hanging fruits. You know, as citizens and as Nigerians, we would always say that government is not doing enough in terms of revenues, and that's common knowledge now. Of course, communication, IT, has demonstrated over time with the percentage GDP, the profitability of the tech companies, and how much bigger that they are relative to financial services company and so on. So government sees that there is, using your phrase, a little bit of headroom that they can take more from that industry. And that's exactly what they're doing. But what we'd like to see on the IT space is not a reluctance to give more. I think the industry can give more. But what's more important is that the industry needs to bake more, and then we need to be able to then serve and give more to government. So what's interesting for us, really, my perspective would be to look at what government is trying to do, what are the challenges in achieving those, and then more importantly is that how do we make the cake bigger in this space.
Let me come back to Mr. Oyedele. In terms of even how to make the cake bigger, you actually did mention earlier, government is broke, isn't it? And one of the ways to get money, in fact, perhaps the major way, is through taxes. Now the government is going in all dimensions, with Senator Ali Ndume from the legislative point of view adding to that conversation. Are there other options for the government to look at right now if it doesn't increase taxes as proposed by the VAT 7.5%, which we discussed at that time, or with this style now? Because they're saying that if this is done, they may dump the 7.5% VAT. Are there other creative options for the government to look at?
The answer is yes, but let me start by saying that the current approach overall is wrong. So on one hand, you have a senator who has a personal view as to how best to fund government finances. And then because he had a bill that he tried to push forward in 2016 unsuccessfully, in my view, he's just looking for an advantage to say, you know what, Nigerians, I think this is a better tax than the increase in VAT. You know what, let's forget about VAT and take my bill. I think that is wrong. On one hand, the senator doesn't have the view to be able to tell the impact this will have on the economy and how much revenue you would raise. If you increase VAT rate from 5 to 7.5%, all things being equal at 2018 level, you collect about 550 billion. Yeah. That is shared by federal, state, and local governments. If you raise 9%, if you impose a 9% tax on communication, which includes data, MMS, and all of that, at best, you raise about 180 billion naira. And the way I did my analysis, I know government has not done any calculations. If you take MTN, for example, which controls about 35% of the market, yeah, reporting a little over 1 trillion in revenue. So just project that to 100 and say the guys outside of that space, maybe another 10 or 20%. Add it together and apply 9%. And in fact, you would find that it's not the entire revenue they reported that will be liable to this tax because some of it is value-added services. That has nothing to do with data itself. So let's even say you make 180. How does that solve a problem that we said even the 550 billion would not solve? And then he was of the view, I saw him spoke on TV, that this will not affect the poor people. That is wrong. That is not correct. In fact, it's easier for you to design the VAT increase such that it does not affect the poor people by creating zero-rated item and exemption list. Now, having said that, I think what Nigeria needs to do is we need to stop this idea of Nigeria needs money and we want to make it happen like yesterday. So taxes don't work that way. You have to sit down and have a plan. That plan would include what sectors of the economy is it that you want to promote, which ones are most sensitive, which ones are the ones that you need for employment generation. Because sometimes you don't want to solve a revenue problem and create an unemployment problem. Okay. Yeah. So when you look at all these aspects, including, do we have currently tax expenditure that are inefficient that we can eliminate? Do we have waivers that don't make a lot of economic sense that we need to block them? Once you've identified that, you then say, I want to expand my tax net, and then I want to expand my tax base. Tax rate increase should be the last thing you consider. So if today the compliance rate with VAT is somewhere around 20%, you should focus on how do you get it up. And I've said before, I think even on this show, that in Nigeria, the top 1% is not paying their fair share. In other countries, you find the top 1% paying more than the rest of the population. But that's not the case in Nigeria. Why is that the case? So once you put all of this together, you can still raise revenue in a way that is not counterproductive to the economy, because otherwise, you solve one problem, you create a bigger one, if you don't look at it holistically like that. Okay.
Dr. Ayeni, just give me a few seconds. Let me still stick with Mr. Oyedele because, you know, they are the tax people, they dissect these issues. So let's see. Just like you said, you may, and I think I've also said it on the program, that just what you mentioned, you may just want to create revenue, but you are also putting your people in the employment, on the unemployment bracket. The question is, just like you also said, that the 1% do not pay taxes. How do you create a fair and balanced system around the tax process?
Yeah. So the first thing is you have to start with data. So sadly, Nigeria does not have data. When you find the data, they're not really very reliable.
FIRS says about, I think, 20 million people in Nigeria
but
pay
do they
taxes?
know who they are? So FIRS will go on the streets and force market women or Okada riders to register. Those are not the guys. That's why the increase in the tax net in terms of the number of people has gone up by more than 150% over the past few years, but the revenue collection has barely increased by 20%. If you have the wrong people in the tax net, your revenue will not go up. Today in Nigeria, even for VAT, if you hawk things on the streets and you make only 1,000 naira per day, you're supposed to charge VAT, register, and file returns on a monthly basis. No other country does that. So we have a lot of poor people, micro businesses, small businesses that place too much burdens on them. And that in itself is counterproductive because those people can't comply. The taxman is spending too much to enforce compliance. You have leakages in between. So what government needs to do is to say, who are the right people that need to be in the tax net? Are they paying the right amount of tax? Are they paying their fair share of tax? And people who are guilty includes MDAs. They include even the Presidency and the National Assembly, according to the report by the Auditor General for the Federation. Government MDAs, many of them haven't prepared financial statements. Many of them haven't remitted taxes they deducted from contractors and their employees for 5 years. Now, for us to be serious as a country, we have to set the tone from the top. Once you set the tone from the top, clean up your tax laws. Many of them we inherited from the British before independence. Like the Stamp Duty Act is an act of 1939. How lazy can a country be?
Does this 15 naira that we pay?
Yes. At the time, nobody thought there would be internet or online banking. Yeah. They're forcing that law today to impose a tax on online banking. Why don't we just rewrite it? So if you take all the, and this is common to all the laws, personal income tax, and the list continues. We currently have over 300 different taxes in Nigeria. The revenue we made last year, 98% of it from FRS came from 4 taxes: petroleum profit tax, company income tax, VAT, education tax. At state level, 1 tax gave more than 90% personal income tax. With all these communication tax here, increased VAT here, there was police levy fund,
which we discussed.
Yes, there's also tolling is coming back to the road. Instead of just introducing more taxes, is there someone that says there's a list of 150 taxes that we don't need? Let's repeal them. So that your messaging to the Nigerian people is even something that people can say, well, it's not easy, but we understand. There should be empathy. Because at the end of the day, whatever you're trying to do is for the benefit of the people. And I hope that we also get to a point where in some of these new taxes, there will be a provision in the law that says, provided the money collected from this tax shall be used only for infrastructure. Let government try and look inward. How can we cut down the cost of running government? You can't keep collecting money from us to do salary payment, to do overseas tours, to do allowances, and to buy cars for senators. It's just not fair.
And you tell us, anyway, let me just stick with him a bit. This question before I come to you. What would you say to people that say, in fact, not to people, even the FIRS too, because the FIRS, tax is what you pay, value is what you get, isn't it? And the value is not coming from FIRS. Theirs is, let's collect money, we give to those that will create value. So don't even blame the FIRS when it comes to that. But where I'm going to is that the tax to GDP ratio of Nigeria is 6%. And in other African countries, VAT is even more than VAT right now at 5%. Is there another argument, the positive argument coming from those that are proposing it, that Nigeria also needs to pay higher VAT? Come on, guys, 6% is very low, yet the largest economy, yet we don't have infrastructure. How do we get infrastructure if our VAT is 6%?
Yeah, so there's...
if our tax to GDP ratio is 6%,
yes. Yeah. So there's merit in the arguments. Just that is what I call the single story. So if your story is incomplete, then you're either misrepresenting the facts or you're deceiving people, including yourselves. So these other countries where you have the average VAT rate across West Africa and even the other African countries, somewhere around 18%, so a lot higher than 5%. But here's the difference. So in those other countries, including in Europe and the other developed countries around the world, the VAT system is a flow-through tax. So which means when you set up a business to do business, you don't bear the cost of VAT. Whether it's on services, whether it's on goods and raw materials, whether it's on fixed assets, if you have to pay VAT, you claim it 100% and you pass it through to the final consumer. In Nigeria, that is not the case. So you don't get input credit on services, you don't get VAT credit on fixed assets, and a number of items are blocked for VAT purposes, which means even though on paper it's 5%, there's what we call a cascading effect, such that what you really feel is more than the 5%. So, and I said earlier on that many of these countries, including in Ghana, you don't have to register for VAT until your turnover is up to about 13 million naira equivalent. In Kenya, that is 17 million. In South Africa, that is 23 million. But here in Nigeria, we chase Okada riders, barbers, and ask them to register for VAT. We cannot take one leg of the story that favors us, which is the rate, and ignore the structure of the VAT system. So my view is that if you restructure the VAT system to be a proper VAT system, where the burden of the tax is mostly on the middle class and the upper class, make sure that there's no impact on investment and production, let it be on consumption and final consumer only, then Nigeria will be right to even make it 10% or even 15%. So the problem is not the rate, it's the design of the VAT structure. Yeah.
Now, Dr. Ayeni, come in now, and you've
yes,
listened to what
yes,
he had to say.
I'd like to make a few points. First is to agree with Taiwo around the issue of capacity in generating revenues. So for tax authorities, clearly they are not collecting as much as they should. It's also a fact that they acknowledge and say all the time. So what we believe needs to do from a technology perspective is to embrace and use technology more. You know, tax authorities all over, federal and the subnational levels, they will tell you all the time that yes, we are using technology for tax collection. But we have seen over time that this has been impacted by a number of factors. First, capacity and scale within the tax authorities themselves. Like he says, dealing with so many taxpayers, how do we collect these taxes? That's why, from a technology perspective, we always advocate that it's better to support businesses and allow some growth and scale. In IT, we talk about pushing IT companies to unicorn level status. So we want companies to grow to $1 billion company. Now, when you have businesses, we know the story of MTN, the example he has given. What MTN pays since 2001, they said they've paid over 2 trillion in all manners of payment to government. So imagine if you have a number of companies that are able to do that and deliver. And technology is fastest way.
So you must create an enabling environment to grow
exactly.
such, which you actually talked about as you are chasing revenue. You are pushing.
Absolutely. So technology is the fastest way to grow company and wrap them up to that level. So you are dealing with fewer agents who then mop up these revenues, and then you are collecting your taxes in a more efficient manner. But then again, to the issue of the communication service tax, like all the previous taxes, also this has a bunch of challenges. The bill is proposed to be looking at FRS doing the administration and then working with NCC, and you are targeting collecting taxes for telecoms companies that are licensed only by NCC based on the bill. Whereas he says he wants to collect taxes from pay-per-view services. Now, in Nigeria, pay-per-view services are mostly licensed by NBC. So already there is an issue. So you want to collect taxes for some people, and then you are banking based on the law on NCC to be able to do enforcement and withhold their licenses if they default. At the same time, you're saying that you're going to be relying on a lot of agents. By the way, FRS and, well, largely FRS, I've tried in the past to work very closely with telcos to improve VAT collection for telecommunication services. And they've met with a lot of challenges and resistance over time. And that's understandable, because what FRS was seeking to do was to have direct connection to their billing systems, to their call records, to their call logs, and things like that, in order to be able to assess correctly. The law didn't quite, in the view of the telcos and their regulator giving them protection, provide access in that kind of manner. And they agreed to work out a different approach. This law, this proposal, this bill, clearly states that you must give access to all those details. The billing system, government will appoint an agent that will be able to have access to all this information. That already will give the communication companies some concerns. One of the things they do is work with National Security Advisor, for example, who see a lot of this asset as security asset, national security asset, because they use them in pursuing enforcement for banditry and all the security challenges we have. So there are a lot of concerns already in the bill that getting it to work, one would wonder if sufficient level of engagement and collaboration and consultation
How would this work actually if consumers will pay a 9% charge, isn't it? When they make a call, when they consume data, and when they subscribe to a cable TV platform. Though Senator Ali Ndume has said that a lot of poor people, it will not affect them. And we do, I think we do have about 174 million telecom subscriptions, that's telecom lines around the country. But of course, we know that one person can have
More than
multiple
one.
lines and all of that. So how will it really work? His argument of saying that it will not impact the poor, I'm actually thinking where he was actually thinking from.
In terms of the bill, the proposal is that the 9% will be charged net VAT and NHIS, National Health Insurance Levy, from the bill of the telco provider. So what it means is that the telecom companies are not the one footing this bill. It's a consumption tax or levy that they will pass to the end user. So to say that it will not impact the poor people, it's a complete negation to the facts of the bill, because any and everyone that subscribes to electronic communication service would pay the 9%, unless, of course, the service provider, the telecommunication company, decides to pay on their behalf, which is unlikely. So it's a fact that the bill represents. But in terms of how it will work, well, we would wait to see how it will pan out in the market if it's eventually approved and becomes an act. But what the fact says is that the service provider passed the bill to the subscriber of the service.
You know what came to my mind right now? Perhaps they also need to take a look at it. It just hits me right now, is that you're trying to promote financial inclusion. You're trying to say our rural people or our poor, let them be financially included. And one of the things to make you also financially included is you having a phone so that you can have access to financial services, being banking services, insurance, pension, and all of that. And if you now have that phone, which I don't think is a luxury, is phone a luxury?
No. It's not.
So do you understand? Yes. I know you know where I'm going to.
Yes.
You're trying to promote this. On one hand, you are going from the back and saying, pay 9%. Come on, guys. Are we really thinking so that we don't walk across what we are actually proposing? Yeah.
So this is the reason why I said that I do not think. I think that in Nigeria, actually, maybe you should need to find a law to say that nobody proposes any bill to do with tax revenue other than the executive, because you do not have the sufficient information and data to do otherwise if you are not the executive. Even the executive is struggling. Now, here's the point about, does this affect the poor people? The answer is yes. So the contribution of the telecommunication sector itself to the GDP is around 9%. But that sector is facilitating more than 30% of the economy. So you have so many other sectors that rely on what the telecommunication sector is doing. So when you raise that cost, apart from the fact that you also reduce the tendency for financial inclusion, you raise the cost of other businesses, including the poorest people in society. So if you think about it carefully and you say, well, we still want to do tax on telecommunication, but we are targeting middle class and the upper class. Always exclude businesses and exclude poor people. Your design could then be that if your data consumption in a month exceeds a certain threshold, which you create by looking at data. So we know in Nigeria about 120 million people are living in poverty, right? So the rest of us who are not living in poverty, you see the pattern of consumption. It will tell you. You could also say that anything to do with pay as you go, I'm letting you free. Most likely, the people who can afford 9% on telecommunication, they will be the guys doing postpaid, and they don't even care whether there's 9%. They can afford it. So again, if you design the tax system carefully, you get the right result without creating more problems. So I think the problem I see is that this senator does not have sufficient information to do it. I think it was driven mostly, in my view, by self-interest. Because initially when they brought this bill in 2016, there was an accompanying bill on welfare scheme. And I read it and I was shaking my head. They wanted to create a fund where they can use this money to support people, including some people to learn and do studies abroad. And I know once you set up something like this for doing welfare that is not well defined, it's some politicians that will benefit from it. So this, in my view, is not in the interest of Nigeria, not in the current format.
Well, not in the current format. Okay, Dr. Ayeni, just as we close, I wish we could have more time to discuss, but just as we close, what are your closing remarks, especially coming from the IT space?
Okay, so the closing remark coming from the IT space is that government should recognize that the IT industry can contribute a lot more to GDP and to revenues. And the way to do that is to strategically identify businesses, homegrown, that can demonstrate the ability to scale and be unicorns, $1 billion businesses, and that would make it easier, reduce the cost of collecting revenues from these companies because you're not dealing with a much fewer number of entities. And then in view of acts that we are signing, ACTA and then the West Africa Economic Zone and all the things that government is pursuing, it just makes sense to be a lot more strategic in the way we deploy and support technology businesses in Nigeria to be able to improve the tax revenues of the government. So that would be my parting shot. The government needs to pay a lot more attention to that and revisit how the support for that sector is being done.
I promise we're going to have both of you again. I know Mr. Oyedele will be going back to Lagos, but we'll see if we can connect on Skype and also have you on board. Let's perhaps dissect the tax system, because you also have the online transactions, which would also in your purview. All right, just before we go, in fact, I saw a quote by Winston Churchill, and let me read it before we go. We contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle. That would be very difficult. It would be
impossible.
Impossible, yeah. Anyway, that's from Winston Churchill. Many thanks to you both for coming on the program. Thank you, Dr. Bosun. You don't want me to put the doctor.
No.
All right, and Taiwo Oyedele, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
All right, I've been speaking with Taiwo Oyedele, who is the West Africa tax partner. That's PricewaterhouseCoopers, as well as Dr. Bosun, Ayeni, an IT expert, Director Digital Africa. We've been looking at the proposed CST, Communication Service Tax Bill, proposed by Senator Ali Ndume. I hope they've listened and perhaps they take one or two things out, just like you said, perhaps not in this format. They need to rethink it. But we know that it could become law after 2 readings, isn't it? But let's see how it goes. Many thanks for joining us.